Hello, I'm Cara Dahl Russell, and today I'm going to be talking to you about the life of composer Georges Bizet, who lived from 1835 to 1875, and his Symphony No. 1, his symphony in C major. This is, of course, a major work by a beloved composer who worked about 100 years after Mozart. He composed songs that were a regular part of concerts in the park, and these songs are still part of pledge drive specials and on perennial greatest hits lists. The music of Georges Bizet, born Alexandre César Léopold Bizet. He's a French composer, best remembered for his Spanish-flavored work from 1875, the opera Carmen, and it is a prime example of a realistic dramatic approach that influenced the Verismo school of opera at the end of the 19th century. Bizet's father was a singing teacher, and his mother, Aimée Léopoldine Joséphine née Delsarte, was an accomplished pianist. She came from an impoverished but highly cultured family. Her brother, François Delsarte, was a distinguished singer who used to perform at the courts of King Louis-Philippe and Emperor Napoleon III. So, a musical pedigree. Bizet's musical talents declared themselves so early and so unmistakably that he was admitted to the Paris Conservatory at the age of 10. He was taught by Charles Gounod, and by the age of 20, he had an opera, The Miracle Doctor, performed in Paris, and his cantata, Clovis et Clotilde, won a Prix de Rome, which provided a state pension for 5 years. 2 of these years to be spent at the French Academy in Rome, followed by a year in Germany. It was also required that he submit a religious work each year, but his first failed so miserably that he vowed never again to write religious works, and the following years he was allowed to submit operas. Bizet struggled with the feeling that writing music came too easily to him, and that he had nothing new of his own to say. He wrote to a friend, "I want to have ideas before beginning a piece, and that is not how I worked in Paris." He struggled between his own facile capacity and superficial works that were popular in his day, and a desire to create something that engaged on a deeper intellectual level. Ironically, at the age of 26, his first 2 works after his return to Paris failed not from lack of intellectual interest or musicality, but because they lacked a dramatic structure that created a form and a drive to these works. One of these was The Pearl Fishers. It has some memorable and beloved arias and duets, and a striking setting in an exotic oriental fishing village. But even in brilliantly staged current productions, it can be pretty boring to sit through, even with a hurricane and vengeful gods. It is worth noting that both The Pearl Fishers and La Jolie Fille de Perth contained a working-class setting combined with a sort of religious or magical force. From these 2 relative failures came his goal to focus on exotic atmosphere and dramatic truth. Today, we would say to focus more on realism. And for Bizet's part, it was a notable dropping of religious themes. Now think about this for a minute. A child prodigy with an extensive, marvelous education. But as his 5-year grant came to an end, he now began to support himself by giving piano lessons. His career as a composer was not very successful either, and money remained a constant worry. He wrote a number of songs which he hoped to sell, basically the life that any working musician can identify with. On the 3rd of June in 1869, Georges Bizet married Geneviève Halévy, the younger daughter of a composer, Jacques Fromental Aleve. The couple had one son, Jacques Bizet, born in 1871. In 1872, his letters show that he was deeply stirred by the events of the Franco-Prussian War, and during the siege of Paris, he served in the National Guard. Initially, the marriage was happy, but later differences cropped up between them, mainly because of what biographers usually refer to as Genevieve's nervous instability. Now we get to the dish. Shall we throw a little light on her nervous instability? Bizet was having trouble with his wife, so he got her mother involved in their personal affairs. Geneviève had always had a difficult relationship with her mother, and this strained the relationships of all three. But why was his wife upset? Before their marriage, he had had an affair with their housekeeper, and he and the housekeeper had a son together. The housekeeper and her son were living in the house that the young wife was brought into. Housekeepers had a great deal of authority in running a household, in some cases even more authority than the wife, and regardless, they had to interact closely for the running of the house. And while the housekeeper is financially dependent on the family, the wife is dependent on the housekeeper for everything. I think that might be enough to cause some nervous instability. For years, they passed the boy off as the son of another family member. But I can't really imagine this living situation going on for years. Can you? Certainly it would make for a great movie. Meanwhile, Bizet's biographers talk about how he was depressed at the state of his marriage. Poor Bizet. As you study music history as much as I do, it becomes part of a recurrent trend that takes the side of a famous composer against a wife who often has very justifiable grievances. As you study music history, you need to be aware of this and question why some of the things are said by the people who are saying them, and what their particular slant from their time period might be on these issues. Bizet was a heavy smoker and suffered from recurrent throat problems throughout his life. In 1874, while he was working on Carmen, he was severely afflicted with throat issues, which recurred again in March 1875 and then in May. Eventually, it was determined that he died from, quote, a cardiac complication of acute articular rheumatism, unquote. I think today we might call this arterial sclerosis or congestive heart failure. Upon his death, he got the felicitation which he missed during his lifetime. The media, which had previously condemned his works, especially Carmen, now called him a master. After his death, Geneviève showed little interest in preserving his works. Many of his manuscripts were lost, while others were tampered with. Apart from Carmen and the L'Arlésienne suite, few other works were performed. It was only in the 20th century that his true worth was recognized. It is also believed that it was his realistic approach which influenced the Verismo school of opera towards the end of the 19th century. Today we're going to listen to his Symphony in C major. It was completed before he won the Prix de Rome when he was 17 in 1855. It was one of the lost works and not discovered and performed until 1935. It is considered comparable to the works of Mozart or Mendelssohn at the same age, which is very high praise indeed. It has flowing orchestral expertise and a happy blend of Viennese classical style with French melody that give the symphony a high place in Bizet's output. And since its comparatively recent rediscovery, it has become a concert staple. So today, a work from today's youth, a work he wrote at the age of 17, his Symphony No. 1, his Symphony in C major. Enjoy.